Cristina Caffarra, very warm welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. I had the pleasure to interview you back in 2022, but because of the dynamics of the development of regulatory toolkit and overall competition law and policy over these years, and obviously because of this amazing event which you host annually, just happened very recently, I wanted to use this opportunity and maybe to double check the most important messages which have been shaped by the stellar participants of the conference, and your reflections about these key ideas. So why wouldn't we start with your reading and your interpretation of the main takeaways of the conference?
Thank you so much, Oles. It's my pleasure to be here. I very well recall our previous engagement almost 2 years ago, so it was fun. Let me perhaps start with what I was trying to achieve with the conference, what the motivation was for this event. And the premise is that there is a great number, wall-to-wall competition events, competition law events, that are essentially about the status quo. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, slight variation on the same themes, but fundamentally very boring at this point in time. And I thought at this particular time, when we are witnessing these incredible shifts that are taking place in the world around us, at a time when the political economy is certainly swinging in an important way, it is very difficult to continue to just look inwards at competition as if it was a silo, a thing we do in isolation. We need to place it in a broader context. It is a tool of economic policy, a very important tool. And I think it has an important role to play alongside other tools of economic policy, not in a church, not in a silo, not in isolation. Needs to really be proactively thinking about the ways in which competition policy can complement and assist other tools. To be clear, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding, there is no suggestion that competition policy alone, competition can achieve all of these broader goals, but it needs to be cognizant and think alongside. And to me, what was very useful as framing this whole way of thinking was, I go back to the executive order of President Biden, US President Biden in 2021, when he introduced, in fact, it was Tim Wu's idea, but in effect, this notion of an all-of-government approach. In other words, other government departments need to simultaneously adopt this notion that competition is important, that competition is what we're striving for, and so we need to row in the same direction. And indeed, that was the message, I think, that the US speakers were bringing to the discussion. Deliberately, I invited not just, of course, Lina Khan and I had the pleasure of hosting Lina Khan and Jonathan Kanter, and they were obviously center stage, but there was Heather Boushey from the White House talking about industrial policy, industrial strategy. There was Rohit Chopra, who is director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but has got huge experience in this notion of statecraft and the way in which one needs to think about policy more broadly. There was, of course, Ambassador Catherine Tai, who's the trade ambassador, who is in a realm that traditionally is not being connected with competition, but has actually created a connection between trade and anti-monopoly policy. So going back to your question, the idea for me was to give a platform to a broader view of antitrust, a view which is not just this narrow silo, we do things like we've always done them. We know what we're doing because the law is somewhat immutable, is somehow unchangeable. We apply the law. We are in a narrow technocratic field. This is what I'm pushing back against. I think it hasn't delivered. in terms of outcomes. And it is in danger of becoming less and less relevant if interpreted that way. So to me, the vision is really to think about antitrust and competition policy as part of a broader set of tools, in which we need to also think about the role that competition policy plays in pursuing certain objectives which have to do with industrial policy, reindustrializing, resilience, all of that, and certainly also on the side of trade. There is a big discussion about trade rules. Are they appropriate for the times? So I wanted to really put forward a platform for a discussion that was broader than the usual boring things that people talk to each other about.
And one of the features of these events which you host annually is that they are extremely popular and they are very, very dense. You try to optimize with timing, and you can see people in the corridors, in the back of the room, sitting on the chairs. It's really kind of cluster of academic. Well, there were not many academics from what my observation, but mainly policymakers. Yeah, there were, but critical mass were those who do competition policy, who make their hands dirty, who not only philosophize, but kind of an implication of this condensed, fully packed event is that you didn't have time to discuss details. And now I wanted to discuss a few details with you, your understanding of things. And mainly the focus is on the new term, which has been shaped, a new pro-competition industrial policy. And I understand, obviously, industrial policy is a very diversified toolkit, and competition policy is by far not the only mean, and maybe not the central mean, but it's not an isolated, it has impact. So I wanted to ask your understanding of what would be the contours, what would be the parameters of this European, I imagine, industrial policy done by means of competition law.
Let me just say another thing before we get there. I do hold this conference every year, but this year was different, was even more, if you like, I think, aspirational than in previous years, because I really feel that we are at a point of inflection in which the past discussions are no longer relevant, and we really need to move to something which is broader and more broad-based. And what is emerging in this discussion is that there are two tribes in antitrust. It's very, very clear. There are two tribes. There is a tribe, which I identify with the defense complex, as I discussed, which is protecting its own economic interest. Its lawyers, economic consultants, all out there defending the status quo. Some academics too, who I think are ahistoric in their view of the world. And then there is a very large group of people, which you could see at the conference. There were 1,000 people there. There were 1,000 people online from 35 countries, actually very enthusiastic about the model, particularly young people writing and commenting on social media since that this was in some way mind-expanding and a breath of fresh air. Because we need to, because this view that competition is a technocratic, self-standing endeavor is dead. It shouldn't be there. Of course, people are defending it. Those with a vested economic interest in defending it are out there defending it, but it is over in so many ways. Now, let's go back to your question. Look, industrial policy in the competition discourse has never had a place because, of course, historically, it's been associated with bad national champions. And this is the problem that industrial policy has in general, that when you allow, particularly a federation of states, a multi-state entity like the European Union to effectively talk about industrial policy, what tends to prevail are national interests. So you have states pursuing their national champions. And it is also associated historically with some notion of protectionism. We are protecting our own national champion. That's always the risk. The conversation has changed fundamentally because, of course, of the polycrisis that we are exposed to. We have seen the pandemic making it very clear that supply chains are brittle and they are weak. We have had war, which has created enormous havoc in Europe and elsewhere. We have the planet boiling and so on. So it is very clear that this idea that we can't really, the state should be out, this neoliberal idea that the state should be out, we should leave it to market, is has failed in the modern world. There are investments, there are interventions that need to be made that clearly cannot be left to the market because the market is not delivering in the face of these emergencies. That inevitably creates a role for public intervention. And I'm certainly not the only one to say this. There is a whole host of people out there talking about, with language which I don't necessarily always share, but Mariana Mazzucato talks about moonshots and the need to have the state as partner in this investment. But there is a whole group of serious economists, from Daniel Rodrik and others, Nathan Lane was at my conference, thinking about a new industrial policy, how to shape industrial policy in a way that is not just national champions. It needs to be European industrial policy, not national industrial policy. What does competition have to do with this? Well, competition policy never really, of course, got particularly involved, other than through state aid policy, which is about protecting competition from the excesses of national champions and so on. And in that sense, it is fine. However, there is a question as to whether state aid is fit for purpose. The state aid rules are fit for purpose in the current time. I know that Enrico Letta, former president of Italy, Prime Minister of Italy, is producing a report, so is Mario Draghi, for the Commission. And one of the things that is coming out of this report from the anticipated content is that state aid, as is currently practiced, with objectives of just curing market failures and pursuing efficiency, is too narrow a goal in terms of what we need to achieve more broadly. So I'm saying that there needs to be thinking around what are the industrial policies or the industrial strategies. You may have heard Heather Boushey, she was incredibly articulate in the conference describing what the US administration is seeking to achieve with investment. We need something like that, which is obviously not the job of DG Comp. DG Comp is not going to go out there and set out the industrial strategy for Europe, but it needs to work in partnership with those who set that up to make sure that state aid rules, other competition rules are not in some way in the way, and in fact proactively favor this need that we have to invest and develop. We have deindustrialization. There are parts of Europe that are impoverished and deindustrialized. The notion of sovereignty, resilience have a lot to do with this. I heard recently comments that, well, competition policy is nothing to do with resilience. Oh, yes? So monopolies and resilience are not related? I don't think so.
But okay, I think when we were discussing the DMA 2, 3 years, 4 years ago, it looks that we have somehow our energy was channeled to proving the obvious rather than discussing the nitty-gritty. And now with entering into force, we already start seeing how the sleeping dog of EU law wakes up and starts barking at the most basic level, a designation where the critical mass of this limited energy is being, I would say, spend it ineffectively by again proving and reaffirming the obvious. And it looks that with industrial policy, rather than discussing whether we need it or not, it is important also to know the parameters. And imagining that competition policy does play a role, would play a role in this new pro-competition industrial policy. I wanted to see how would you manage taking the message, one of the messages of Olivier Garçon from your conference, saying the first task, if you have limited resources, so you have 40+ people, is to tick the legal box. Without it, you will face challenges in court, and by the most skillful lawyers and economists, as you know, they will never leave you any procedural mistake unnoticed, and then it will be problematized. So you have to tick the boxes, but also you have to be skillful, to know how to do it. And again, another message by Francesca Bria, saying that she was chairing the Italian Innovation Fund, and most of the success stories have been purchased immediately by big tech, I imagine, yeah, by people not from Europe, let's say. So we continue being incubator, generator of ideas and startups without scaling it up. How to change this vicious cycle? Or maybe this is inherent feature for us, being proud of just producing good regulation, and that's the European place in this global supply chain.
Well, I'm not quite sure. The question is very wide-ranging. I'm not quite sure what you're asking me. If you're asking me how exactly I would do it, I mean, I'm just trying to stimulate a debate and a conversation on the need for this. Because if you're telling me that, oh, we only have 40 people and we have to be very modest in our ambition, I don't sign up for that. I think that competition agencies have got to be very ambitious, and they've got to be beating the drums. So, I mean, I don't know where to go with that. I'm certainly clear that, as I said, we are at a time of overlapping emergencies in which the competition policy we used to practice 15 years ago is no longer relevant in that form, unless we want to just close our eyes and close our ears to the world that's out there. I know there is a faction of people who say, but the law, as if the law was Moses' tablets. I've told you this before. Is the law Moses' tablets? It never, ever adapts in its interpretation. We're seeing in the US that a number of judges are beginning to move when they're taking decisions on cases. They are adopting decisions that are possibly unexpected. So I'm not saying there's this wholesale change in the black letter law. I'm saying that the interpretation of the law, I've written an article on this, competition and the political economy, antitrust and the political economy, needs to move somewhat with the times. Are the judges completely isolated in monasteries, or are they seeing what's happening out there too? Precedent is an important thing, but they're setting precedent. How can they be not seeing, not feeling what is out there? So I think the purpose of what I'm doing is to just try and convene people with smart and bright ideas who are going to push this forward. I cannot be expected to single-handedly have the solution, but the conference had a number of incredible economists. By the way, I often get accused of wanting to expel economics from competition law. No, I want to expel bad economic consultants from competition law. That is a very different objective. I want to expel this view that everything is monetized and everything is ultimately becoming pulpified into economic advocacy. That is something I disagree with deeply and I will push against. But at my conference, you had some superstar economists saying super interesting things, like Daron Acemoglu, Foucault, and so on. These are people with really something new to say. Incidentally, none of them comes from the industrial organizational crowd. What a surprise. So I think that there is a lot to do. I mean, but if we sit back and say, well, you know, competition law is well defined, we know what we're doing, we've always done it that way, we'll continue to do it that way, well, we're left behind, because it isn't what is happening in the US. In the US, of course, they are starting from a different position. They were totally doing nothing until 2019. And no one more than me knows that, because they were under a permafrost. Now they've actually accelerated massively, and they're in a big swing, which I certainly admire. Europe comes from a different position. We tried to do a lot of things 10 years before. Are we succeeding? It's a question mark, and there are many causes for that. But I think it's a time to reflect very, very intently on what we're doing and whether it is enough and whether it is the right posture. The
posture. I think this is the the phrase which epitomizes very well the new features of this proactive mindset which competition law enforcers or competition policy enforcers do have to have. This is your phrase, and I think it reflects very well this new modality, let's say. The posture, I understand, is reflected in greater competences, the competences which are more flexible, less formulaic, but more discretionary and more even bespoke. If we talk about UK competition for digital markets context. So how do you see? Do you think this broader vision should be possessed by the top level of officials, or even caseworkers have to be somehow rebooted, recalibrated from their kind of box ticking, better safe than sorry spirit into more proactive policy making feature?
Well, the posture comes from really a comment around people often saying, well, if you want to achieve that, this is not the law, you need to change the law. It is not true. The law is in the books in most cases. I think one of the strongest messages from Nina Khan and Jonathan Cantor in the US has been that they very much put emphasis on the notion that they were reviving antitrust based on the existing laws. No new law has been passed. The Sherman Act, the Clayton Act have been there for over a century, some cases. So there's been no new law, but they've been very, very clear that they were going back to some of the original animating value of that, which had to do ultimately with protecting freedom, protecting democracy. This is the overarching theme. If you really think hard about my conference, we were talking about power, not price. This is what has fundamentally shifted. So regulators need to not necessarily hide behind this notion that, well, the law, we would need new laws to do this. Well, the laws are there in many, many cases. The question is how you apply them. And that is a question of posture. Are you going to simply say, I believe the law is enabling me to do this, and I will do it, which is indeed what Lina and Jonathan are saying? Or are you going to just be somewhat super cautious or push back by the defense complex the whole time? It's a question of posture. And it is a posture that needs to be pervasive. If you think about the way in which this new way of seeing things, the focus, when I talk about power, not price, I'm emphasizing that the whole emphasis has shifted towards concerns being about the economic power of these large companies that pervades society, and it does pervade the political arena too, and it does influence the economic and political discourse, and ultimately feeds into democracy. So this is where it's at. I think that we cannot be somehow held back by, of course, the view of the defense complex, which will say always the law doesn't allow you to do this, the law doesn't allow you to do that. Says who? The law is allowing to do a lot of things if the posture is right.
Okay, let us pause here and try to channel it to the Digital Markets Act enforcement mechanism. We obviously see that we have to make to do some priorities and select some maybe industries or maybe some areas of law. Obviously, with UK, it will be even more clear that there is no list of obligation. It will be only the aims which the CMA would have to achieve. How would you, should it be somehow informed, policy driven or goal oriented application of these discretionary rules, or we just have to consider? You were very realistic, let's say. You never were particularly excited about the DMA changing the very nature of digital markets and digital economy. A little bit of fairness there, a little bit of contestability. That's very well taken. And I think now we somehow realize you cannot change everything. So what would be the end goal in your result? Do you think we should limit ourselves to trying to recalibrate the very structure of digital markets, or maybe we have to change the key players in this market if we talk about pro-European industrial policy? And if the later, is it even doable?
Again, there's a lot packed into that. I'm a skeptic in the following sense. While I've said repeatedly that I applaud the democratic effort that came into passing these laws, we are in a very difficult place, because fundamentally in Europe, notwithstanding all of the agitation out there saying we have been pioneers. Yes, we've been pioneers since 2010. We've achieved a perfect round zero, because with the Google cases, we've achieved zero. With Amazon, we've achieved zero. With Apple, these cases are ongoing, and there's nothing to show on the ground, by which I mean the market outcomes haven't been shaped. Then we pivoted to regulation, thinking that that's maybe the genius idea we needed to be able to change the market structure by creating competitive dynamics and opening up to contestability. And there is a whole academic school which is there writing article after article after article about the wonders of the DMA. I am really puzzled. I understand that people are hopeful and enthusiastic about it, but think about what it can achieve. It is going to be, what we're faced with is a situation in which we are telling these companies, go away and mark your own work, come back with a compliance report after I've designated you. If you're not compliant, we will send you a naughty sort of note, and we will start possibly a non-compliance proceeding. Complying with exactly what companies are going to say, well, what are we supposed to be complying with is not entirely clear to us. So it's the letter, not the spirit of the law. What's the spirit of the law, and so on. This is a clear dynamic which is going to unfold before us in the next few months. We will see not one, not two, but more gatekeepers being declared not compliant, I think. Then that will open up the whole set of legal challenges. There will be a lengthy discussion in Luxembourg, and nothing will be really fundamentally changing because it can't, because some of the ideas there of opening things a little bit, opening a little space for competition will not be taken up, will be frustrated. So my question at the conference was, what is our theory of change? In the same way as I didn't see antitrust enforcement leading to any change on the ground, and I was involved in each and every one of those cases, I sense and anticipate that notwithstanding all the investment that the EC has put into it, and it must be seen to succeed, I get that. But really and truly, when things are said and done, we are not going through that to create any real threats to the gatekeepers. There won't be entrants who are challenging their gatekeeping. So fundamentally, yes, we're going to create a little bit of fairness, a little bit of contestability here and there. Somebody who's going to come in, but it's not going to disperse that power. It's going to not distribute that power. So what are we doing? And this is the question. I don't have an answer. There are people out there like Francesca Bria, like others, Glenn Whale, others I saw speaking at the European Parliament, and Francesca did a great event at the European Parliament recently talking about we need to think about alternative models, not just trying to break open the gatekeepers and insert competition, which is not going to really challenge them in a fundamental way. Yes, you're going to get a little bit more. Fine, great, let's have it. But in terms of creating real alternatives, that isn't going to do it. So this also brings me to this other point, which is when we put all these calories into taming big tech, we in Europe are taming big tech. A, we'll see. B, how is that going to actually further our own situation? Europe is in a difficult place. Europe has got serious issues of growth, of industrialization, as we discussed earlier. So when I look a little bit above the parapet and I think, let's look beyond this taming big tech rhetoric, how is the citizen of Europe going to be particularly excited in the south of France or the south of Italy that we're taming big tech? They don't care. They want to know, what's my employment? Where's my inflation? Where are things? And of course, these are not things that can be achieved through competition policy. I'm preempting that pushback. Of course, we're not going to create jobs through competition policy. You need an industrial policy that works, but then you need competition policy to work alongside. So all of this is jolly good and interesting, and it will keep us entertained, and it will create enormous amounts of work for all the lawyers who are there sort of defending it, and the economists who are saying blah, blah. But in terms of real outcomes, will it deliver anything worthwhile? That is my question. So what are the alternatives? I think we should work collectively with people who are saying, well, let's think about a decentralized, again, industrial policy strategy that looks at how you can create alternative to Internet 2.0. I mean, this is what we've seen concentrating and being dominated. There are people out there who are saying we need sovereign funds, we need state investment, we need to expand certainly the work we're doing with decentralized alternatives. I think that work is interesting. I've been saying that for 3 years. It's not it's spluttering, it's not really taking up. But I mean, it is to me quite obvious that we're going to go this far and we're not going to change the landscape.
And obviously, it looks really quite disappointing when people try to reduce the potential of the DMA to opening up a vertical market for some most proactive business users who are just most vocal and who know how to wrest the necessary rhetorics in order to escalate their particularistic interests into somehow vocabulary of end users or consumers or whatever the final goal is. And my concern is that we burn too much heat with discussing whether we need it or not, rather than discuss even hypothetical scenarios about the mechanics of the process, how to set up this communication between different DGs, if you talk about European Commission, and maybe engagement with other influence groups, how to do it in the long run perspective. So it should be more Machiavellian than Campanella somehow utopian vision. But again, obviously, we need some substance to discuss the mechanics. But I really hope that we will have some discussion about the mechanics at some point, maybe in 2 years' time, about the more technical stuff.
I mean, honestly, the big lift is to get people to even see this vision. At the moment, because of vested interests on the part of the defense complex, and because generally there is a force of habit and great inertia, people are not even seeing the broader picture. So I think one needs to really kind of be vocal about the broader picture, which at this point, that broader vision, I'm not saying this has always been that way. At this point, that broader vision seems to me to be pursued quite effectively. We don't know. We're in an election year, so everything can end at the end of November. But in the US, there is at this point this sense of pushing forward with an all-of-government approach, which seems to me very embedded in every one of the officials you talk to. this isn't to say that Europe is not doing nothing. This is a wrong debate. But it is about thinking about how things relate to each other and how the traditional way in which we've been doing things really needs rethinking. If you think about it again, in the US now with the current administration, there's been a very clear shift. I talked at the conference about one panel called Power versus Price. We worry not about price effects, but the broader effect that market power has in economies. In Europe, it's wrong to say we still pursue consumer welfare. That's a wrong debate. Consumer welfare isn't in the decisions of the courts. Forget that. But it is still the case that we pursue companies not for dominance, but for abuse of dominance. Okay, so we've been telling each other for the last 20 years and more, there's nothing wrong with being dominant. It's okay, but you need to abuse that dominance. It will come after you. Well, guess what? Wrong, because there is a lot wrong with market power per se. Now, how do you actually operationalize all of that? Well, it is something to be thought through. But one of the panels I had at the conference was about market power dysfunctions. You had people talking about potential side effects on inflation, taxation, inequality. You had people, super economists talking about market power is a problem per se. Let's not just delude ourselves that, well, it's okay to be dominant. It's all okay as long as you don't abuse it. Well, that's again a different way of thinking about it. We are at the point where we told ourselves that for too long, but we now see the implications of market power for real in the economy. It has made supply chains brittle. We skirted collective death in 2021, and at that time we discovered we were in deep trouble with a lot of things because we had offshored everything, and we did deindustrialize Europe and the US to places that are cheapest, thereby disenfranchising a lot of communities, creating enormous inequality. So, is this a product of market power abuses? No. But it is a product of a whole neoliberal approach, vision, which has offshored, hyper-globalized, liberalized, and we allowed it to happen. And that's not to guilt ourselves, but now it's a different paradigm. Where is everyone? Why aren't they seeing it? Well, they're not seeing it because there are billable hours to be made defending the status quo. There are economists who are making a lot of money defending the status quo. And I've been a consultant, which gives me, I think, title to speak because I know where the bodies are buried.
Just to follow up and clarification, there are two kind of approaches to do it. One is to change the very DNA of digital markets, to try to somehow to fight the bigness per se, so to say. And another one is to adopt European and political entity, geo-economic entity to this reality without challenging the systemic features, and somehow try to integrate and scale up European companies on the global landscape. Maybe not necessarily within core platform services. Maybe there are other digital industries, computational. You mentioned last time that only a handful can participate meaningfully in all this AI hype race. Maybe others, industrial data. Where would you put the priorities on changing the DNA of digital markets, or somehow trying to adopt European postured vision into this global landscape?
It's got to be both, because of course there is no disputing that entities with enormous market power, digital gatekeepers with enormous market power, are also in a position of strong bargaining force vis-a-vis their dependents. And so there will be a lot of ways in which they're exploiting that superior bargaining power. There is a huge area where we need to deal with the data issue, where we are not enforcing. So there is a ton of enforcement to be made. Yes, I think that regulation in these areas, of course, is important. We need to use it to ensure that, yes, there is more fairness in the relationship between the gatekeepers and their dependents. This is super important because, of course, any large dominant company left to its own devices will tend to do what it's in it, what's in its interest. And so this is clear. But in parallel with this, we cannot delude ourselves that these regulations are going to create a different market structure. They will create a little, a little bit here and there, but it will not create. They will not create novel structures. These gatekeepers are too entrenched. They're too big. They're too effective. They're too good. They're too powerful. We are not going to open them up and disperse that structure. So there needs to be alternative action. And this is, again, what I think we should be doing, thinking seriously about these alternative ways. And there are initiatives. In Germany, there are sovereign funds that are beginning to invest into this. There are people like, as I say, Francesca, Glenn Whale. Taiwan is an example of something where this is actually happened. Taiwan has moved away from the traditional structures. So this is thinking that is going on in the world, which we need to develop it. There are technologists, there are people working on this, but I think unless we're thinking about parallel structures that might become alternatives with different protocols, with people owning their data, with data being the basis. This is all sounding utopia, but it sounded utopia for some times. And so what's the alternative? In 20 years, we will have the same gatekeepers. And in fact, we are going to have the same one in a world of AI because they are projecting, grandfathering that market power into that world. So this is what is troubling me. There is a great deal of defensiveness when I say these things, that people say Cristina is not helpful. But smell the coffee. This stuff is great, and I understand the regulators have got to do it. But think ahead. What's before? I mean, are these guys going away? Are we going to see entrants challenging the gatekeepers? In what world? It's not happening.
Unless you help them in Machiavellian way. And some participants said at your conference, judge us by what we do rather than what we say. But that's on the margin. Let us move to the technicalities. Another event which you co-organized this time with Yanis Lianos at University College London, one of the institutions you are affiliated with, on ecosystems. So it's a kind of it's a term which on one hand allows, and we see some cases of the European Commission, it can be used as a shield, but it can be also used as a sword, saying that as a defense, essentially. Can you please elaborate on the import and how do you understand the importance of the term and how it can be instrumentalized in this ROC competition industrial policy, maybe competition policy, industrially mindful competition policy?
So the notion of ecosystem is very important because we need to move away again from this very narrow way of thinking about competition enforcement, which is traditionally based on I define a market and then I identify a particular mechanism that allows me to leverage power from A to B. This has been the practice of antitrust until now. Whenever you had a vertical or a conglomerate deal, you have been essentially seeking to show whether there was a leveraging mechanism that through which, for example, a merger could enable the power to be transferred from a market to another. This is a very dated and narrow view because it is no longer about that. We are talking about multi-market players with presence in multiple areas with assets and capabilities that are fungible in different activities. And the question analytically is, okay, how do I consider that in the context of a specific merger or a specific assessment of conduct? Because it is clear that these players do not think market by market. It is clear that they have assets and capabilities that are broad-based and they are used in different activities. So how do I use that analytically when gauging a particular merger? So the danger or the concern is that, of course, we don't want to be just saying, well, you got stuff. Okay, so you got data, you got operating system, you got this and you got that, therefore that's an ecosystem and therefore that's a problem. Okay, that's not very satisfactory, because then you ask yourself, well, is this particular deal the problem? Is another deal the problem? Why is this particular deal making a difference to that collection of assets and capabilities? I've been in that question with Microsoft Activision, where initially the CMA tried to argue a sort of proto-ecosystem theory by saying you have cloud, you have operating system, you have a collection of games, you have this and that, and therefore you have a strength, and this deal is problematic. And the pushback based on current law is, wait, where is the mechanism that says that this particular deal is problematic? So in the end, what happens is that because the agencies don't know how to articulate these ecosystem theories properly, they end up falling back on some form of vertical foreclosure, which is the go-to workhorse. So in Microsoft Activision, if you look at the decision of the commission, at the decision of certainly the CMA, in the end, we ended up with a vertical arithmetic on something that doesn't really, or a vertical arithmetic logic. Is there an incentive and ability to foreclose in this particular market? And going back to that is reductive. Think about Amazon iRobot. I wasn't involved, but the way in which we will never read the decision, by the way. I know that the commissioner tried to explain it in a broader sense, but everything I heard about the way the case was going was vertical foreclosure of competing vacuum cleaner producers. Now, that is crazy, because if that is the theory of harm, is dumb, okay? Is Philips going to be foreclosed in producing a robotic vacuum cleaner, or Samsung by some sort of self-preferencing by Amazon? Is that what we are spending millions in resources to fight? It cannot be that. It's a dumb theory of harm. The issue is more, is there an Amazon ecosystem which is comprised of a number of assets, and where this particular acquisition fits and creates additional incremental power, perhaps as a result of data, perhaps as a result of robotic technology. But it's not expressed like this. Now, the public press release says something broader and more grand, but we'll never read the decision. As I say, my understanding was the entire opposition to the case was about narrowly foreclosing rival vacuum cleaner producers, which is dumb. So I think ecosystem theories need to be developed analytically, and the regulators know that. The way in which they need to be developed is with their cooperation. I've written an article in ProMarket about this, because frankly, academics who are forward-looking, and I don't mean many in the IO crowd, but many who are looking to do something novel like the network economist and so on, are very willing to pursue this, but their position is that we need data, we need information from the agency to just experiment with methodologies and approaches. And so that is something which is very dear to my heart, because I think intellectually is one of the areas where we need to make the most progress. And we cannot just wave our hands and call anything an ecosystem. Although I think the economics and the dynamics of ecosystems is different, and therefore it is right to be worried about it. The final point in this is, do I think again, the posture should change when it comes to mergers? Well, of course it should, in the sense, and we are already seeing it happening. This is part of the discussion we had with Olivier Gessant at my conference. He was a bit reluctant to say that things have changed. They may have not. Yes, we would block WhatsApp, Facebook today, but we would have blocked iRobot 5 years ago. I mean, the reality is that we are now at a point where we know what we know. In the past, we were much more careful about type 1 error. Let's be sure we don't commit type 1 error, because the world might end. Now we are in a place where we say, well, so who's going to die, right? Who is going to die if you block 3-4 mergers a year? Adobe Figma is better off. Amazon Plate is better off. Yes, iRobot is a problem, but sorry for them. But all of this idea that investment will decline, there will be no more startups, really, with animal spirits in Silicon Valley, if you block 2 deals, you will not see investment and innovation. This is silly. And so I think this is a time also in which the judgment about type 1 versus type 2 error, the error cost approach, has changed because the political economy has changed. So we need to make a different assessment. And so if you ask me, should these deals be blocked? All of them. Just don't. Just don't. Just don't do it. Don't come out of the boardroom and think you can do it. Go build it. You don't need this story. Go do it. Who is going to really suffer? I mean, we've accumulated market power for 2 decades and let it happen. And we are now looking at this as if somehow there is a sinful group of people who are trying to prevent efficiencies from being realized. What efficiencies? Benefits to society. What benefits to society? From a handful of mergers that may not go forward? Just kind of, let's think about something more real. It's only the defense complex that makes a fuss. No one else cares in the real world.
I know we are approaching to the end of the conversation. When the meta ruling was delivered on the preliminary request, preliminary reference within preliminary reference procedure, you did a great. You've been invited by Euractiv to their podcast with Johnny Ryan, one of the guests of your conference as well, and you were discussing the case and the implications of this kind of de-silos of competition policy and data policy. I wanted to maybe to remind us the main implication of this new era, but also, again, as a shield, wanted to ask you the new potential hypothetical idealistic newcomers into horizontal big tech markets will face a challenge of being much more privacy mindful and responsible than those who came from the Wild West wonderland in early 2000s. Now those, they say, don't ask how we earn our first billion, we are privacy mindful and we are happy by disintermediating to protect privacy of end users. And it looks that privacy agencies, either by just secretly or openly happy with this solution, but it cements the status quo. So on one hand, we see that these policies are interrelated and there are so many benefits out of this, but on the other hand, we see how the privacy can be used as a shield. How would you somehow help us to navigate in this, to unravel this labyrinth?
But look, I mean, in talking about the need for a broader vision, as you know, I've been agitating with Johnny Ryan and others for a significant period of time, at least since 2020, about the need to be much more cognizant of data protection concerns in antitrust. So, we had a whole battle in Google Fitbit. I don't think Google Fitbit would necessarily be approved today, but, I hope it wouldn't. But this has not happened yet. Okay, so we realistically, again, this is another area in which the data protection agencies are not enforcing effectively, and the competition complex says, you're at the end of the corridor, don't call us, we'll call you. So, I mean, this remains an area where with Johnny, we are trying to make as much noise as possible. Johnny, of course, is very effective, but we haven't really moved in a significant way. In part, I think it's because the data protection people think about it in fundamental rights terms. So for people who are working in data protection, privacy is a fundamental right, and they don't think about it in terms of economic trade-offs. And so you'll never see the data protection people really trying to engage with the competition dimension of it too much. It's only occasional people like Johnny who see the link, who want to just get involved with the competition crowd. And the competition crowd really doesn't know what to do with privacy. It doesn't have a price. You have the economic consultants still arguing some dumb stuff around it. They don't know anything, and then yet they speak in competition cases. It's quite painful to watch, because there hasn't been this integration, this intersection of expertise between the two. And so, I mean, yeah, so going forward, I'm all for continuing to push this. New entrants need to be compliant. I mean, GDPR is a fact, and it's a good law.
Before asking you the final question, and this time the final question will be not recommendation for students, because we did it in 2022, and I refer students to watch these really amazing recommendations, but maybe recommendations to those who are in a more mature stage of their career. How do they deal with this cacophony or this kind of continuous avalanche of information, opportunities, challenges? Maybe you have some, tips, some observations of successes and failures, which you would be generously sharing with us. But before reverting to this, I wanted to ask you also about the situation, United States, not about the cases, not about the situation, but how you sense, you engage, you communicate constantly with the key policy makers in the United States. Are they as optimistic as they've been at the beginning of this administration regime? Are they as enthusiastic? What are this kind of ad hominem stuff? Do they still persist? Does it still persist? And what's their feeling? What is their spirit?
Well, if anything, my sense, of course, I'm not speaking for any of them, but my perception is that they're cautiously more optimistic than ever. They knew when they came into office, in 2020 or 2021 for Jonathan, it was certainly a difficult uphill climb, because the US antitrust had been asleep for 20 years. And deliberately so, as a result of a set of policy. When people say, well, Cristina wants antitrust to become political, I despair, because I think, don't you know it is political today? Don't you know that the antitrust we're practicing today is the actual product of political choices that were inflicted on antitrust by the powers of the time? So we're talking about Reagan, we're talking about after that Bush. So there was a political vision that went into the antitrust that we practice. So clearly the enforcers had to basically climb up against that huge hill. And they did so against enormous opposition from big bad law, from the economic consultants, from adverse politicians, from anyone else. And the expectation was the judges would never follow, the judges are conservative, the judges would never allow. There's been an enormous amount of press ad hominem against them. Lina Khan had on average an article against her. Much of it blatantly gender biased, racist, in the Washington Post, in other places, for the best part of the past 2 years. I think what's happening now is that some successes are being clocked. So you see at the DOJ, the airline cases. Jonathan Cantor talked about it at the conference. The JetBlue Airline Alliance first, and now the JetBlue Spirit case blocked by a judge, with a judge who was a Reagan appointee. So, clock that. A Reagan appointee blocked that deal. We've had Illumina Grail effectively, then we've had IQVIA recently blocked by a judge, essentially siding with the FTC. There are multiple deals that are, yes, that have been pushed back, but it seems to me that there is, and of course there was the Penguin, Random House case, there is a change underway, that the judges are beginning to, some of them at least, are beginning to listen, and there are some successes that are being clocked, and that is very important. So I think no one is sure what will happen in November, but also I think it would be very, very wrong that the people who actually now hope in a Trump administration to revert the clock should not think that it is quite as easy as that. I mean, Republicans are very much actually clear about much of their anti-big tech posture. A Republican administration may well not favor big tech in the way some hopes. Yes, there are some which are in the pockets of big tech and they will say what they have to say, but it's no mystery that Donald Trump is certainly no friend of big tech. So don't expect that if there is a Republican administration, we suddenly go back to 2010, I think. That's my sense.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Now, let's go for your advice.
Well, you asked me to I keep thinking that the people who should most reflect on what is going on are the students, because I had enormous response to the conference, both on social media, but privately to me, from students from all over the world asking advice, mentorship, and help, and so on. And I am enormously encouraged by that, because it seems to me that the new generations are saying, what world are we in? You know, I was saying again at the conference, Jonathan Cantor was saying how he gets mobbed when he talks to students. Lena the same, when he goes to law school, they talk and they get a huge amount of attention. I was talking about an episode that happened to me. My daughter is at school in the US, in Texas, and I gave a class to her group about antitrust in Europe, and literally there were people everywhere. And at the end of it, I was also surrounded by students asking me, do you actually know Lena Khan? Do you actually know Jonathan Cantor? That's amazing. So there's a sense that the students are getting it. And I wish that before making choices that take them in various directions, they reflect on this. People in mid-career is more difficult, frankly, because one of the great disappointments for me as somebody who has been a lead consultant for so long is that the incentives in consulting are very clear. It's eat what you kill a lot, eat a lot, and make a lot of money. So unfortunately, people in mid-career in consulting are in that mind frame, and who can blame them? They have young families and so on. That's something which I regret, but it is the reality. And you see it, you know, you see it, I kind of look at the older one and I think, you need more money? Do you really? I mean, come on. But for the ones in mid-career to find a very lucrative alternative to being part of the defense complex is hard, which is also why, you know, I had people coming to me in the conference who were associates of big law firms saying, yeah, the partner really didn't want us to come, but we're here because we support what you're doing. So it's interesting, but I think all I can say is just, you know, think about what we're doing and try. I've always been a consultant. I'm not walking away from that. I'm trying to just, I've tried to struggle with my conscience. People always say Cristina is a nightmare because she doesn't do what she's told. Well, exactly. Exactly.
Cristina Caffarra, thank you very much indeed for this really vivid and illuminating and very informative conversation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.